Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be going over the question, is weed killing your gains? Spoiler alert, I think yes. That's just my take on this, and we're going to go over 12 PubMed articles that I've kind of did a deep dive on, and we're just going to kind of hit the tip of the iceberg on this. But if you want a deep dive for yourself, it's going to be down in the description below. Now, before we get into the reasons as to why I think yes, I first wanted to talk about the limited research that is on cannabis and on athletic performance or weight training or endurance. As many of you guys know, cannabis and weed has recently been legalized in a lot of states here in the United States. However, that was not always the case. So even though there's more research coming out now, that's not the case for the past, because in the past, it's an illegal drug. There was not a lot of accessibility to cannabis, nor was there any benefit in researching cannabis and the effects, especially on athletes, because it was an illegal substance. You know, looking back a decade or 2 decades ago, there was a lot of ads being ran on the negative effects of smoking cannabis or, weed.
Altered to produce heart malfunction and destruction of brain cells to the point of memory loss.
However, with it becoming more accessible to the average American and being legalized in more states, and with all this new research coming out, I think it's time that we kind of talk about the hard question, which is weed killing your gains? And if not, will it enhance your performance? So after going through these research and medical papers, I believe that weed is killing your gains, and if not killing your gains, it's keeping you from achieving your max potential and could potentially be setting you back by at least 15% of what you could be. Now, some of you may be wondering what benefits may come from smoking weed, so we need to look at what actually is in weed. Found in cannabis is THC and CBD, and even though they share the same family, they both affect the body very differently. THC is psychoactive, which is responsible for the high feeling you usually get when you have a good brownie, a good blunt, and it's going to increase your mood, going to give you that euphoric feeling, while CBD, on the other hand, is more responsible for the effects on the body that are more beneficial. Although CBD is not psychoactive, it's responsible for the anti-inflammatory properties of cannabis, as well as its benefits in some individuals to reduce anxiety and reduce pain. So now, with these terms defined, let's get into our research. So one study states that the muscle relaxing effects are a highly sought after effect for many athletes when it comes to cannabis consumption. It goes on to state that isolated CBD consumption may contain the same effects, as well as be more purported to have a variety of other beneficial effects, such as improvements to sleep, exercise recovery, pain, anxiety, mood, as well as recovery from concussion. They also claim that these factors represent motivation for use amongst athletic populations, including professional athletes. Now, for me personally, I have consumed cannabis when I was younger. It was for a reason similar to this. I was injured. I wanted some relief for the pain. It also helped my mood. I thought it was very great at the time. However, after using for over a month, now I wasn't using chronically. I wasn't using every day. I would use about, every weekend or so for a month or two. And I started to notice that my cognitive abilities were decreasing. I wasn't able to focus as well, and I wasn't able to retain information, especially my short-term memory bank, for as long. That's my personal experience with cannabis. However, it did give me that euphoric feeling. I felt great after I smoked, and it also reduced the amount of pain, and I even thought I slept better after smoking. However, some of these studies will argue these points, as we'll see later on in the video. I just want to go ahead and get my personal testimony out there, so that way everybody watching this knows that I'm not coming in here as someone that's just anti-weed. Yes, it's going to ruin your gains, it's going to kill your gains. Don't ever fucking do it. I feel like it's also kind of like alcohol. I think if you never do it, I kind of wish I never did, because there's some times where I'm like, man, it'd be so nice to, smoke on a blunt right now or have a little pot brownie, because I know it'd give me that euphoric feeling. It'd take away all my joint pain. It'd make me feel great. However, I know that there are negative effects that I experience from consuming cannabis. And so that's why I'm not going to do it. But just like alcohol or any other drug, once you try it or use it, it's in your memory bank. So when times get tough, or you just feel like you're a little bit more achy than normal, your brain's gonna be like, hey, we know how to fix this. Let's go get more cannabis, or let's drink more alcohol, whatever it is. If you never do it, your body will never crave it or see it as a solution. So I recommend, if you've never done it before, I recommend you don't do it. And if you feel like you just have to, I recommend you don't make it a habit. It should be common knowledge. If you went to high school, you had DARE programs and stuff, weed is considered a gateway drug. And so basically what that means, if you're a young viewer or just unfamiliar with the term, gateway drug refers to a drug that once you try it and you see that there's no really major negative effects, you try it. It's kind of like playing with fire. You play with fire, you don't get burned, and you had fun doing it, so you're going to do it again. But one day you'll wind up getting burned, or you'll develop an addiction, and that's what it's trying to prevent. It's trying to prevent you from ever trying it, because like I just said, your body will never crave it. You'll never want for it in your life if you don't try it. But some people will try it. They'll have great benefits from it, great euphoria from it, And that leads them to try different drugs because they're like, okay, well, I tried this one, it was fine, let's try a different one, let's go a little bit stronger than that. That felt so great, I wonder what a stronger one feel like, So that's something I felt like I just had to hit on real quick. Now, continuing with the study, it seems like it's mostly split among the opinions on the efficiency of using cannabis to beneficially affect sport performance. However, it should be made clear that cannabis demonstrates clear potential to disturb cardiovascular, respiratory, and cognitive function. It goes on to state that perplexingly, despite there being few new data generated over the past few decades, repeated interpretations of this data have led to vastly different conclusions with reviews presuming no beneficial effect, potential advantages, and predominantly an ergolytic effect, which if we define ergolytic effect, that means it's detrimental to your physical performance. Now, one of the studies stated of the existing data, comparing cannabis users to non-users, there are no reported differences in aerobic fitness, blood pressure, muscular strength, and endurance measures, work capacity, and perceived exertion. In physically active cannabis users, there's no difference in anaerobic power or markers of stress and inflammation. So with that being said, that basically shows that if you are a cannabis user compared to a non-cannabis user, there's almost no effect. And if there is an effect, it's not going to be beneficial, because if it was, you would have less stress markers in the cannabis group than you would the non-cannabis group, because they would be benefiting from the anti-inflammatory effects of consuming cannabis. However, we don't see that in this study. We also don't see the cannabis group outperforming the non-cannabis group. It goes on to state there is presently little evidence to suggest chronic cannabis use performed in isolation from training or competition exerts a great effect on any measure of physical performance in recreational active participants. Look at another study of Stedward and Sen, which I'm not sure if I pronounced either name right on that. For one of their studies, they studied the effect on cannabis consumption for 20 healthy individuals. So they observed not only the cardiorespiratory response to exercise, but also strength, and they also measured physical workload. After smoking a moderate dose of THC, 18.2 milligrams, participants showed no apparent effect on hand grip strength, but submaximal work capacity. At the same time, the submaximal work capacity decreased, submaximal heart rate increased for the cannabis group. Now, like I stated earlier, cannabis does play a role in the cardiovascular system. It can often be interpreted as an elevated heart rate, as well as an elevated blood pressure. Now, these cardiovascular effects for some individuals can create a sense of anxiety for some. So if you ever consumed weed and you felt like you got really anxious or really nervous, that could be a potential reason as to why you felt that way. So what does this mean for your workouts, for your athletes, for your weightlifters? What does an elevated heart rate and elevated blood pressure get you? That gets you decreased performance in the gym. Your body's going to be using way more oxygen. You're not going to be able to get as many reps in your sets. And especially if you're doing any endurance training, such as swimming, running, or any of your aerobic exercises, it's going to increase your breathing and increase your heart rate overall. And it's going to be really pushing your endurance to the max. Your cannabis consumption will decrease your performance. Now, some of you guys may already be taking caffeine or pre-workout, and you may be wondering why I'm even mentioning that. We're talking about cannabis, we're talking about weed, we're not talking about pre-workout right now. And the reason I'm bringing it up, though, is because caffeine can also increase submaximal heart rate, but it improves endurance performance. Now, going back to the lack of studies, stuff that can conflict with this research would be people's bias. You have individuals that are biased, they think that cannabis really helps them, and whether it's a placebo effect, any psychological effect with drugs. Also, it's a possibility that psychological factors could modify exercise behaviors, but this is yet to be an empirically tested outcome. It's important to consider when examining the psychological effects of cannabis in a more targeted performance setting. In another study by Renaud and Cormier, 12 participants were asked to go on a progressive workload until they achieved leg failure. So for this study, we had a control group and another group that consumed cannabis, 1.7% THC dosed at 7 milligrams of dried cannabis per kilogram body weight. At maximal exercise, no differences were found in the heart rate, VE, VO2, or volume of inhaled carbon dioxide, suggesting that despite the submaximal tachycardic response, physiologic responses at maximal workloads were not different after cannabis consumption. However, examination of submaximal through maximal work clearly shows a diminishing difference between placebo and cannabis groups. At workloads greater than 80% of maximal effort, no differences existed. So looking at this study, when you reach 80% of your maximal effort, you're no different than the cannabis group. So this basically implies that there is no benefit to consuming cannabis before or during a workout. That's all this study means. And if you look back at the last study we looked at, that means that submaximal effort, so below 80%, will be affected by cannabis negatively. So this goes back to the reason as to why I said yes, that cannabis does kill your gains, is not directly, but through indirect means, such as, okay, we haven't got up to our 1 rep max. You're not powerlifting, you're doing bodybuilding, so you're staying within the 60% of your 1 rep max, and you're doing reps. And so that means that you're not going to get as many reps, because I'm going to explain why you're not in just a second from the same study. But also, if you're doing submaximal output and getting negative effects from the cannabis like previously stated, you're holding yourself back. Now moving on, there was a significant difference in exercise duration, with cannabis exposure decreasing time to exhaustion. So for the non-cannabis group, they were able to go for 16.1, give or take 4 minutes before failure, while the cannabis group, on the other hand, achieved about a minute to 2 minutes less, coming in at 15.1, give or take 3 minutes. So what this means for our weightlifters and athletes, that means that when you're on the field with someone that hasn't been smoking cannabis, you're going to quit a minute to 2 minutes before they quit. And this is really crippling for the endurance athletes out there, whether you're doing swim, cross country, track, whatever you're doing. This is going to affect you the most. Now, our weightlifters, it means that you're just not going to get as many reps. It means you're just going to get fatigued quicker than your gym partner. And like I said before, it's just going to prevent you from reaching your potential, because you're missing out on the amount of volume that you could be getting from your workout, as well as some of those beneficial reps. And if you're a powerlifter, it could keep you from getting up to your 1 rep max. Now, talking about the recovery aspect of cannabis, looking into the exercise-induced muscle damage aspect of training or athletic activity calls into question the pain management and recovery. Now, for a lot of athletes, you wind up having ibuprofen or NSAIDs involved, to manage your pain, but in really severe cases, you have opiates. But now we're going to look at if you use cannabis. So in a recent study of elite rugby players, 26% of players had previously experimented or are currently using CBD supplements. Out of that 26% of rugby players, 80% of them cited pain management as their primary motive for experimenting with CBD. Now, despite 80% of them claiming that CBD was for pain modulation, only 14% of rugby players reported any beneficial effect. Now, this could be due to low versus high doses of CBD, 10 versus 500 milligrams a day, going to have very differing pain alleviating results, with obviously the higher end reducing the amount of pain. But this is also something I want to talk about. If you take away the pain, whether it's NSAID, CBD, whatever you're consuming, opiates, whatever you take to alleviate that pain, your body's in pain for a reason. That is your first indicator that, hey, let's slow things down, let's take a break, let's not continue to perform at maximal output, let's relax. Because if you keep performing, keep pushing it, you're going to wind up severely damaging the muscle tissue or creating an injury for yourself. So pain is your body's first indicator for you to listen to as to, hey, we may need more protein in our diet, to be able to recover better, we may need more better sleep, and we may just need to take a step back from training overall to be able to give our body enough time to properly recover. Despite the widespread inclusion of strength training among high-level athletes, studies investigating the effects of CBD supplementation on resistant exercise are extremely limited. However, looking at a study where participants consumed 150 milligrams daily of CBD, there was no beneficial effects on either muscle function or perceived muscle soreness in untrained males. In another study where they looked at CK to assess muscle damage, following a single bout of resistant exercise, suggested CBD supplementation attenuated the acute increase in CK. This means that the supplementation of CBD actually prevented some muscle damage from occurring. However, there were also reductions in strength within 24 hours of supplementation. So this is big. This means that even though it may have therapeutic effects, it may be able to reduce the amount of muscle damage that you incur, you are going to be decreasing your strength. And plus, muscle damage has to occur because, like you guys know, you got to tear down the muscle so it can build back up. If you put in the work to tear down the wall completely, and you're taking a supplement to make sure the wall only gets tore down, a fourth of the way, are you really reaping the benefits from the workout you just got? Are you potentially setting yourself back? Or if you're looking at training as more of a maintenance, or are you just looking at coming back the next day feeling more fresher, feeling better, and just trying to maintain what you have? Now, looking at another study where they supplemented CBD after an intense strength protocol on skeletal muscle damage and lower body performance, the results clearly show an increase in CK and myo concentration in both groups at all time points after 24, 48, and 72 hours, with significant difference between the groups at 72 hours. The exercise-induced muscle damage and the increase in CK and myo concentrations after T24 after 24 hours confirms observation from previous studies. However, a single supplementation of CBD did not reduce muscle damage within 48 hours. A longer time interval of at least 72 hours, however, might be sufficient for effects of CBD to occur to a detectable extent. Therefore, this study cannot confirm the inhibitory effect of CBD on CK concentrations after 24 hours. So this study actually counteracts what we just talked on. So whether it does or not, that's up for you to decide. Go look at the papers for yourself. I'm just giving you the information and piecing together what I have. Now looking at the same study, a significant decrease was observed in a 1 rep max back squat. However, the decrease in performance in this CBD group is much smaller than in the pilot study. This may be due to the different performance levels of the subjects. The absolute strength values and training loads were significantly higher in the pilot study as compared to the present study. This can also explain the different changes in CK concentrations. This study basically says for the non-cannabis group, the back squat 1 rep max was higher than the cannabis group. This means that the non-cannabis group back squatted for a 1 rep max more than the cannabis group. One study concluded that CBD does not directly modulate anabolic or inflammatory signaling in myotubes in vitro, which can likely be explained to the lack of functional receptors, which basically means that due to the lack of receptors in our muscles, CBD has no benefit, or in other words, no effect. This would also go back to a future proposal from one of our other studies that we mentioned earlier, that cannabis consumption is mostly psychological rather than physical when it comes to the outliers outperforming the non-cannabis group. Another study stated, individuals who habitually use cannabis, CBD or THC, and regularly engage in exercise do feel that cannabis assists them with exercise recovery, which goes back to if you're already using it, you usually don't want to be told it's not helping. And especially if you believe it's working or benefits you, you're not going to allow some medical research to come out. It's just like bro science. Some things, we do in the gym that science wouldn't necessarily agree with. They'd say it's dangerous, but it gets you the results. And for some of the other individual effects that may affect an individual more, it's going to go into the appetite. Some people, they'll have a little bit of weed and they'll get insatiably hungry where they'll just eat everything in sight, have crazy cravings, and some people, they're just fine. You also have individuals that claim to have better sleep, and some individuals that have disturbed sleep where they can't get any sleep, and if they do get sleep, they don't feel like they got really good quality sleep when they wake up. And most science would say that it disturbs your sleep. Just like any other drug, it affects everybody differently. Now, if you smoke your marijuana, this is something you should consider, because if you smoke, a study concluded that smoking impairs the muscle protein synthesis process and increases the expression of genes associated with impaired muscle maintenance, not to mention that smoking damages the lungs. So that's basically the tip of the iceberg for the research medical papers I've linked down below and I've gone through. However, with all this being said, most of them link cannabis back to ergogenic effects at the end of the day, which means they're detrimental effects. Like I said in the beginning, and like I'll say now, there's no benefit to having cannabis supplementation for recovery or for your workout. I don't think there's any benefit whatsoever. You have studies that claim that it does help your recovery. You have studies that claim it doesn't. You have studies that say that it disturbs your sleep, which you know how important sleep is. But if you don't, you should look at some of my other YouTube videos. There's also no studies to support that cannabis supplementation increases strength. If anything, from these studies, we know that cannabis reduces our strength and reduces our endurance by a decent amount. And when looking at some of these studies, some participants perform better when they're high. Some individuals in the cannabis group are competing with some of the individuals that are not consuming cannabis. But those are outliers. You look at the majority of the group and they're performing below the non-cannabis group. However, if you want to bank on being an outlier, go for it. If you sincerely believe that you're an outlier or it really benefits you, I'm not here to stop you. I'm just giving you the facts and the studies. Other studies have participants that weren't even able to complete the workload given to them because of cannabis consumption. So until more studies come out, it's hard to differ between the bias of all the studies and participants within them. But in conclusion, looking at the studies, you have about a 10 to 15% decrease in overall performance, especially in endurance, as well as a decrease in strength. You can look up the numbers for yourself in the studies below, with outliers being present in some studies in some of the cannabis groups. So this means unless you're an outlier, you're more likely going to have a negative effect from cannabis consumption before, during, or after your workout. It's not going to help you recover faster, be stronger, better, faster than the individual that you're competing against that's not taking cannabis. If anything, not taking cannabis is going to put you in a better state to achieve your overall potential. This video took over an hour to shoot. There's a lot of information to break down here. I'm going to try to condense it as much as possible. I hope this video is informational for you guys. If you guys want to leave your own opinions or comments down below, I'd love to hear them. And feel free to drop any medical research papers down below. I'd love to take a look at them. Hope you guys have a good morning, a good night whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you in the next one.